It's harvest time for sugarcane farmers and they're feeling bitter. They've delivered their produce to sugar mills, but they say they haven't been paid in months.
October, November, December, January. For 4 months, we haven't received a single penny for the crops we have sold. We'll get that money next year and we're very worried.
The government's capped prices of sugarcane to rein in inflation, but that's causing a cash crunch for sugar mills and they're delaying payments to farmers. It's just one example of how government attempts to keep prices low are hurting the livelihoods of some of the poorest people. India's central bank's trying to boost businesses, so it's cut interest rates for the second time in 2 months to 6%. But many voters want the government to do more.
One of the biggest expectation is creation of jobs. That's gone down for a very long time. I mean, it's just not happening in the few years, but there is a tendency of unemployment. But of course, in the last few years, we have seen very concentrated loss of jobs, especially loss of permanent jobs.
The public has been hassled with demonetization. There are so many scams happening and the government keeps lying to us.
Experts say despite the mounting challenges, economic reforms do not seem to be a key priority for most of the politicians contesting in the upcoming polls.
You are seeing farmers committing suicide, there is agrarian distress, there is jobless growth. I mean, it has increased 40% over the last few years. So these are the main issues on which the political parties should be focusing on. Unfortunately, the election campaign is hijacked by shrill anti-this, anti-that or personal remarks type of a agenda.
The finance minister of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party says he'll drive the central bank's interest rate down further if he's re-elected. And the leader of the main opposition party, the Indian National Congress, is promising cash handouts for hundreds of millions of people.
The Congress Party government will directly deposit money into the bank accounts of the poorest 20% of the population. In 1 year, $1,045 and more than $5,200 over 5 years.
Such measures could further strain government finances without reforms, and that could cause more distress for farmers and others already bearing the brunt of a slowing economy. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
And for more on this, Mobin joins me now in the studio. Hi Mobin, let's start with this interest rate cuts. As we know, it comes a week before general elections that will decide whether or not Prime Minister Narendra Modi wins a second term in office. Are the two related?
Well, it certainly sounds great, doesn't it? Just a few days before you go to the elections, you can say that interest rates have come down. But at the same time, it doesn't really help anyone, at least not in time for the elections. Look, the last time the rate was cut by a similar proportion, 25 basis points, what we saw was that the cost of borrowing at banks only went down by about 10 basis points. The banks are straddled with bad loans and they'll use this opportunity to sort of beef up their own margins. So we shouldn't really expect too much of a dramatic impact on the economy because of this rate cut.
Okay, so if the boost won't happen in time for these elections, when can Indians expect to see some benefit from this rate cut?
Look, let's just put the growth in India in perspective, right? It's still at about 6.6%. That's better than most other economies. The problem is that it's very uneven. Most of it is coming from the services sector, from the high value manufacturing sector. Trouble is that's not where most Indians work. Almost half of the working population is employed in agriculture, and though that's specifically the sector that's been hit by low international prices, price controls in the domestic market, demonetization, changes in government regulations, GST, exemptions, whatnot. So really the problem right now is getting growth going in that sector, and no amount of interest rate cuts will do that. Least of all at 25 basis points.
Okay, so if farmers are a key issue in this election, what has the government promised in that area? Also, I guess, what has the opposition promised as well?
Look, we've seen the government making some very large promises, launching some very large schemes. In fact, Prime Minister Modi is responsible for launching the biggest infrastructure project in the history of the country, promising to create 10 million jobs. But if you just look at the unemployment numbers, which spiked back in Feb, 18 million more unemployed heads joined that list in just 1 month. So just to give you a sense of how much of a crisis unemployment is, if you look at female participation in the workforce, that's actually gone down in the previous decade from 37% to about 26%. If you look at the number of new entrants in the workforce, that's been falling for the past 4 to 5 months. Again, that's a sign of a lot of people really losing hope of making a decent salary in the formal sector. So I think that no single policy or no single sort of sector can really help drive this. The government's taken some steps. They will take a while to sort of take hold, but really, given the size of the economy, given the size of the population and the rate at which it's growing, it's going to take a lot more than just a few policies on the agriculture front or just a few changes in the interest rate.
So tell us a bit more about the unemployment situation. We hear these stories quite regularly of tens of thousands of university graduates applying for menial, low-paying jobs. I mean, what are the parties promising in terms of addressing that?
I think those jobs that we look at, especially the government sector jobs, there's a little bit of context that needs to be understood, right? Yes, there are people who are trying to fill, a lot of people applying for the same jobs, and one wonders why are such qualified people applying for what appear to be menial jobs. But on the other hand, government jobs give you a lot more security than private sector jobs will. You get guaranteed pensions, payouts, you can't get fired so easily. So there's a whole lot of other things that make those jobs attractive. At the same time, the government's been trying to promote jobs in other areas. The Prime Minister has been talking about entrepreneurship and how that needs to sort of take off. But at the same time, if you look at government policy, that prioritizes or incentivizes capital formation, not job creation. So really, the government needs to look back at some of its policies and reassess what are the businesses that it wants to support. Is it the businesses that are able to collect a lot of money very quickly? Or is it the businesses that aren't perhaps able to collect as much money, but can at least offer more jobs? And there, I think, is where policymakers really need to sit down and rehash their economic strategy.
Okay, we'll see what other promises the parties make ahead of the election. Mobin Nasir, thank you as always.